Good morning, everyone. We're going to possibly be done with Genesis 19 today. I have these on there. I don't know how well you can see them because I was curious myself where Sodom and Gomorrah are. I realize oftentimes that there are places and things in the Bible that I've read so much, and I never stop to think, where are these places? Because I haven't normally been a person of geographic relevance. So that is true too. So this is zoomed in. Now, these two maps that I have aren't like anything that I went through 20 maps and found these. These are the ones that I found and I went with. But it kind of worked out. Here is Sodom and there's Gomorrah. And then there is Zor. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but there it is in this area. So I assume this area is what got destroyed, which is very interesting because if that's the case, Zor's right in the middle of it, but it doesn't get touched because that's where Lot and his daughters go. Obviously not the wife, right? Just Lot and his daughters. And then this is zoomed out, and here they are. So you have this I also found interesting. Have you ever wondered where Mamre and Hebron were in comparison to Sodom specifically? So if you remember after the two messengers leave Abram and Yahweh, they go to Sodom. So if they're generally in this area, and then here's Sodom down here. So in my brain, I don't know how yours works, but this is how mine does. If I read something in about 5 seconds, it took them about 20 minutes to get there. Right? That is not 20 minutes. So unless they just transported over there as angels, then that's it. Of course, there's Bethlehem and this whole section. Anyway, so that's what we're looking at. And again, I didn't even consider the fact that Zor's right in the middle of that stuff. If Sodom and Gomorrah, and then there's Zor, if this whole section is the case, and then Abraham's up here. So it is kind of a curious thing to wonder, Abraham went back to, it says, the place where he and the Lord talked and watched all this happen. He watched it from quite a ways away. It wasn't like he was on this hilltop and looked down on it. He was a pretty decent distance away. I got the map so y'all could see it. I have no idea. I didn't look into any of those things. And the only reason why I have some really strong resistance now to a lot of these things, because I got very, very, very much duped by the guy, I think his name is Ron, from like 30 years ago, that found the chariot wheels in the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea. I don't know if y'all ever found, they supposedly found the way, and they went in there and they found these things, and man, I bought into it, and then Gary very lovingly said, Andy, no, that's not, that didn't happen. And so I actually look into it, and almost everything this guy has done has been debunked and shamed, and none of what he said is accurate at all. So I don't know if all that stuff has been found. I didn't look into that. But I wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at in terms of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, of course, Zor and where they went. And I did want to say one more thing about, and this is more just for discussion. I'm not laying claim to anything. Last week, one of the comments that came up is that, part of the purpose of this is that Yahweh is merciful. And I for sure agree with that. Not that he is merciful, but that's the point of a lot of this. And yet, there's a lot of details here. There's a lot of stuff that is happening that, to me personally, calls for some good questions and some good discussion and trying to understand how this narrative is put together. So yes, it is true that it is about Yahweh is merciful, but to me that doesn't take away from some of these other questions. And yes, I realize very much that I can get into the minutia of things and kind of get lost, but that doesn't take away from that there are details here that for me are very interesting to look at and kind of do some pondering about. Okay, so that's where it is. Verse 27, Genesis 19:27. Abraham got up early that morning. So Gary, Abraham was not a night owl. He was an early morning person. But I'm pumped. Well, Gary and I have talked many times. We are both night owls, and neither one of us enjoy the morning. How many of you guys enjoy the morning? Like legitimately? Okay. That's all I wanted to ask. Who enjoys the morning? What's that? No. Well, the reason I find that funny is both my dad and Terry's dad were the whole, are you up yet? Lazy bones and all those kind of things, and get out of bed, and the sun's burning, and all these different things. And yet by 3 o'clock, they're crashed out. What's that? It does, depending upon the time of year. Thank you. I'll tell him that, yeah. My friend Doug said for me to tell you this. So there. So he got up early that morning, hurried out to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence, in Yahweh's presence. And he looked out across the plain towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And again, this is the first time that Gomorrah is mentioned. Before this, it's all Sodom and Gomorrah. And watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. God had listened to Abraham's request. That's interesting. Okay. He had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities on the plain. Now, see, this is again one of those things that's very curious to me, because I personally don't remember Abraham's request to keep Lot safe. Now, maybe that's the intent of the whole conversation they had. It wasn't to keep Sodom safe, it was to keep Lot and his family safe. And if other people are kept safe and the whole city, then that's good. But ultimately, the intent was to keep Lot and his family safe, which is ultimately what happens.
The way that we would understand history today, so
Right.
that conversation may well have happened, as it were, off stage.
Right. Yeah. Now, the point that Bob just made is something that off and on I have been trying to both process and share with you guys on Sunday mornings is, the way that we write narratives and that we perceive history is not the way they did it. I think sometimes, well, not just sometimes, I think the way that we find ourselves reading the Bible is it's so easy and normal and almost rational for us that we bring our setting and worldview into the Bible. We can't help but do that. And realizing that these people thought very different than we do, and their way of, stating history is very different than ours. So it doesn't make any of this stuff not accurate. It just means it's stated differently. So then verse 30, afterward, Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there, and he went to live in a cave in the mountain with his 2 daughters. And as we've discussed a couple of times, the daughters' future sons-in-laws are not there. What happened to them? They died. Yeah, they're gone. And having said that, I was listening to a podcast about this, and something that sometimes gets kind of left behind, at least for a guy it does. I don't know about women, because I'm not a woman, is the fact that these 2 daughters had future husbands, and they had a mom, and Lot had a wife, and they are now both from Zoar as well as then going into the cave. They've lost friends. Lot has lost his wife. He's lost his sons-in-laws, and who knows if he was close to them or not. But now all of a sudden there's 3 where there were 5 and more. And so I never considered the fact that Lot and his 2 daughters they've lost business contacts. They've lost a lot of stuff. They've lost their dowry.
They're probably unmarriageable at this point.
Which then explains what they do with Lot. So I wanted to offer that because, again, I think, now I don't know how you guys read stuff, but there are times that as I read these stories and I already know them, I may not have read them in a long time, but I know these stories, and there's a lot of stuff that for whatever reason I just bypass getting through the story. And one of those things is that Lot and his 2 daughters now, and not only have they lost those people, what else have they lost? And this is it's an obvious question, but you obviously don't know what's in my head, what I'm asking. What is not there anymore? Sodom, Gomorrah, and that whole plain now, as they look over that. I was considering, when I was in high school living in Spring, if all of a sudden I woke up, and it's not that all people are gone, it's streets and buildings and stores, roads, lights, everything is just gone. It's gray, it's dead. Everything's gone, except for, maybe me and 2 of my friends. Everybody's gone. And so as Abraham looks, the city now is engulfed as this furnace. As Lot and his daughters look back from Zoar, everything's gone. Everything's been burned to a crisp. And can you imagine the smell? Because it's not just sulfur. It's also what? Dead bodies. And cattle, sheep, and all kinds of stuff. This whole place is desolate. It's just done. And I don't know that we can, and I'm so glad that I heard that point of view, because considering that, it's not like they just left some friends and they look back and Sodom and Gomorrah is still there. They just had to leave because it was wicked, but it's gone. Yeah.
And as you're talking, it hits me that, they had no food, no place to get food.
Yep.
No place to go get produce, no place to go get meat.
Yep.
For a long ways.
Long way.
I hadn't really.
I had neither.
A lot of these things before.
Because that whole section is gone. I mean, it's not even like someone went in there and they had a couple of fires, in the buildings. It's gone. So if you can imagine, the trauma, the reality of that. And not that it makes it right or better or not, but it does explain what his daughters do, that they realize, to Bob's point, not only are our future husbands gone, but again, what else is gone? Yeah. Family line. Men are gone because everything is over there. And I guess they could take a 6-month trip and try and find somebody, yeah.
I always wondered how Lot made a living after that. Because I don't know if he was still a shepherd living in the city, but chances are, I would think if he went to Zoar, he probably had to beg. He wouldn't have had a house to go to.
Yeah, yeah,
Evil like in Sodom and Gomorrah.
right.
He
Well,
was afraid.
yeah, yeah. Well, and see, these are the things that are very curious to me when looking through this, because if you remember, okay, verse 18. Oh, my Lord, and remember, lowercase l is sir. It's not even master. It's just sir, mister kind of thing. You've been so gracious to me and saved my life. You have shown such great kindness. And he is talking to the angel, the messenger. But I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me there, and I would soon die. There is a small village nearby. Please let us go there instead. Again, the small village here. And so they're coming, and not only in terms of Abraham and the messengers going here, and you have that little piece of water there, but now Sodom, he's saying, let me go here. And this is before the whole thing is obviously destroyed. But I can't go to the mountains. I would die. There's a village nearby, which I guess for him that's nearby. Please let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved. But Zoar, I will grant you your request. And then what's he say? I will not destroy Zoar if that's where you choose to go. So what was going to happen to Zoar before Lot made this request? Be burned up with everything else. So I guess it's possible that Lot could have gone any direction, but for whatever reason he chooses. Maybe these are very treacherous mountains. I don't know. But yeah. You're right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So why he didn't go? Now, if this is true to north, south, east, west, which I will very readily tell everybody, I get lost in a paper bag. So you have to say right or left to me, because I don't know. When we used to live in small towns, older men, when giving me a direction somewhere, and I now this was all in the South. You go up there about 3 miles and then turn east at that big tree, and then you go about 4.25 miles to your north, and then it's like, just give me the address, okay? Because I have no idea where you are right now. So if that is east, then maybe going east, you've got mountains and treachery and who knows. But to Doug's point, he ended up in a cave anyway.
It's interesting. I mean, we don't know what his financial status is at this point, but you can infer some things. If you go to that other map,
Yeah.
what you can see is that you've got the Moabites and the Ammonites right there.
Yeah.
Well, Moab and Ben-Ami, we see later at the end of 19. Those were Lot's sons.
Right. Right.
So you don't get to be the head of nations without having resources, cattle, whatever.
Yeah.
So I gotta believe that Lot still had some of his financial infrastructure, and his sons inherited that somehow. They must have had something, because otherwise they would have been nobodies that ended up with nothing. So.
Yeah.
But they didn't come to the Moabites and the Ammonites.
Right. And it's possible that Now I am fully aware at this point that we may be way into the weeds here, but at my own treachery, I just find this stuff really, really interesting. That sometimes they will, I don't know, overlay, because to Doug's point, whenever you get to the end of 19, their kids, I guess, if you want to call them that, become these people. So it's very possible you have a map overlaid over a map, because I don't know if that means these people don't exist yet, because their ancestor is born here, right? And then they become the Moabites and the Ammonites. But then again, to Bob's point, the way that history is told, if we get too American about it, we get very literal, and we want narrative, we want it chronologically, we want history, and that's not always, in fact, ever the way that they did their stuff. So I'm going to try and rein myself in here and get back to the story. So as they go to Zor, and they end up in this cave, one day the older daughter, verse 31, and the reason we went through all of the other stuff is it just never occurred to me. I never thought to think that Sodom and Gomorrah are gone. That whole plain is gone. And so it's just the three of them now. And I don't know if you guys have seen that show, The Last of Us. I haven't watched it for a number of reasons, but it's essentially there are two people left on the earth. And that's what apparently the show is about. And so now they have three people left in this region. So one day the older daughter said to her sister, could you imagine this conversation? There's no men left anywhere in the entire area. So we can't get married like everyone else. And our father will soon be too old to do what? Our father will soon become like what we know Abraham is going to become later, where he's too old. So come, let us get him drunk with wine, and then we can have sex with him. And that way we will preserve our family line through our father. Now I'm curious from y'all's standpoint, if this wasn't a Bible story and you're reading through this as in some kind of novel or historical setting, and I don't know if you can remove yourself from the fact that it is in Genesis. Well, what are your thoughts about that? You know, you're telling your sister, your friend, somebody, I'm reading this novel or reading this historical narrative, and this happens. What would be your response to what's about to take place?
That's disgusting.
That's really nasty. It's like, ew, really? And in fact, if you notice what they do, so that night they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in, had intercourse with her father, and I'm reading from the NLT. He was unaware of her lying down and her getting up again. And then the next morning, the older daughter said to her younger sister, I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight. You go in and have sex with him. And that way we will both preserve our family line through our father. So that night they got him drunk again. And the younger daughter went in, had intercourse with him. And as before, he was unaware of her lying down and her getting up because he's apparently that drunk. And so as a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. Boom. And the younger daughter gave birth to a son. She named him Ben-Ami. And Ben, for those of you that don't know, I just learned this a few years ago, is the Hebrew for son. So Jesus would be Jesus ben Joseph. That would be his name. Jesus, the son of Joseph. And for those of you who are, but wait, I know, Joseph wasn't his actual biological father, but still that would be his name. So Ben-Ami, He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Ammonites. So these two nations are born out of something that happens right here between Lot and his daughters. Now, to another comment brought up, the Genesis authors, and I say that because I have recently been listening to some scholarship about the book of Genesis in terms of the author. It's just been always assumed by me and by people that have taught me that, Moses wrote all of it. But the understanding is that Genesis is a compilation of narratives, of history. And there's just no way that Moses either wrote all of it or parts of it. So my point being that after this narrative of chapter 19, what happens to Lot? And it's not a question I'm asking to try and stump you. What happened? What begins in chapter 20? Back to Abraham. Abraham goes to the Negev between blah, 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 and then the whole situation with Abimelech. And we find a mirror situation in chapter 20 with what happened in chapter 12, where Abraham goes to Egypt because of the famine, and you have the whole situation with Pharaoh. Now it's the same situation, but it's with Abimelech, and God speaks to him through a dream as opposed to in another way. So after 19, the narrative, the content, the story, lessons, whatever you want to call it, about Lot, we're done with Lot. And we're done with that whole story. And now they kick into Abraham and Abimelech and Abraham's story. So probably I think it was Gary's comment, is the Genesis author/authors, in terms of compiling this narrative, go from, and I hope this is both interesting and helpful to you as we do this, from 12 to 17, we have the story of Abram, and ultimately his name gets changed to Abraham, God's promises to him, God's covenant to him, the relationship that they have. And then when you get to chapter 18, the visit from Yahweh and his messengers, the promise to Sarah. And after this promise, then you have, quite honestly, this very strange and unique story that becomes about Lot and Sodom. And that whole scene about how God is going to destroy Sodom. But what narrative do we see there that possibly keeps him from destroying a wicked area? What possibly keeps him from doing that? Abram's request. So they have this long conversation about if there are a few good people in this whole region. And again, and yes, these are the conversations I have in my head. If not just Sodom, but, well, yes, Sodom. If I can find 10 people in Sodom, Abraham asked Yahweh, if I find 10 people here, then what did God say he would not do? Destroy this. 10 people here, and I won't destroy this. Yeah.
Weren't the Ammonites and Moabs enemies of Israel?
Yes. Yes.
So kind of makes you wonder, maybe God should just...
Yeah. Well, and again, this is something that I've just not even tapped in yet, but if it is the case, because I get oftentimes caught up in assuming chronology when it's not there, An example of that is, none of the Gospels are chronologically narratives. They're not chronological. They're thoughts. They're building a story together. So if it is the case that this is remotely chronological, the Moabites and the Ammonites aren't there yet, because their leaders aren't even born until this moment. So because of what Lot's daughters do, what then develops is you have these enemies of Israel.
That were there after the 40 years of the wilderness.
Yes, right, right.
Up north toward the part of the country that God had given.
Right, right.
Them,
True. Yeah,
They were told, Mount Seir belongs to the descendants of Esau.
yeah,
Ammon belongs to the descendants of Ammon.
Right.
Offspring.
right,
And God told them in Deuteronomy he wasn't going to give them any of that land because the Ammonites were descendants of Lot and also Moabites.
yeah, yeah. So, interesting stuff. And again, I just one more time remind you that if you think about this stuff in terms of narrative and what these authors are trying to, it's a story, it's lessons, it's ideas that they're giving you. This is not chronological, because after chapter 19, where does Lot go? We don't know. He's just gone. And God, again, after chapter 18 and 19, picks Abraham back up again. And now he's Abraham. He was Abram, now he's Abraham. Why Abram to Abraham? Abram means exalted father. Abraham means father of nations. So that shift happens. The idea of Abraham talking to Yahweh and them having this exchange back and forth happens. And so this relationship develops. The authors here are developing a relationship for us in front of us with Abraham and Yahweh. And it continues to flourish. Do you remember how long it was between when God told Abraham he was going to have descendants to when he had Isaac? Ish. About 25 years. Ish. So I don't know what you were doing 25 years ago, but if you can go back that far, that's when God told Abram, you're going to have descendants. And obviously to have descendants, you have to have kids. 25 years later is when Isaac is born. So the development of trust, the relationship, the faith, all of those things that go into this story that is being developed that God is giving to us. And then in chapter 21, you got Isaac. Chapter 22, you have Isaac being offered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway. All right, well, next Sunday, we're not having class because of our Pray Sunday. And then after that, we will start studying something else. Yeah.